The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, the golden sands shimmering under the unforgiving sun. Steve adjusted his helmet and shielded his eyes, squinting into the horizon. He had traveled far, chasing the legend of a hidden desert temple said to hold treasures beyond imagination. The stories spoke of a structure buried deep beneath the sands, one that no adventurer had ever returned from. Steve thought he was ready. He had a full set of diamond armor, potions for every situation, and a map passed down by villagers who warned him not to go. But something about the map felt wrong. The symbols etched into its corners weren't in any language Steve knew. As he followed the marked path, the wind picked up, scattering loose sand around him. The dunes seemed to shift, changing shape, like the desert itself was alive. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The sky turned a deep orange, and shadows stretched long across the landscape. That's when Steve saw it. A faint outline on the horizon, almost like a mirage. As he approached, the structure became clearer. It wasn't like any temple he'd ever seen. The pillars were twisted, curving unnaturally, and the blocks seemed to pulse faintly, as if they had a heartbeat. He hesitated at the entrance. The opening was carved into the sand, a dark void that led underground. Steve placed a torch on the wall and stepped inside. The air was cold, almost icy, and the silence was deafening. The only sound was the soft crunch of his boots on the stone floor. The first chamber was vast, with walls covered in strange carvings. They depicted figures kneeling before a massive serpent coiled around a glowing orb. The details were unsettling. The eyes of the figures seemed to follow him as he moved. Steve took another step, and the floor shifted slightly beneath him. A faint clicking sound echoed through the chamber. A trap. He jumped back just in time as a row of arrows shot from the walls. They clattered to the ground, and the chamber fell silent once more. Steve pressed on, navigating through narrow corridors and avoiding more traps. The deeper he went, the stranger the temple became. The walls began to change color, shifting from sandy beige to a deep, dark red. His torches flickered, their light struggling to pierce the growing darkness. In one corridor, he noticed something odd. The sand on the floor was moving. Tiny streams of it flowed like water, spiraling toward a single point. Curious, Steve followed the movement until he reached a massive circular chamber. In the center was a pit, its edges lined with strange runes that glowed faintly. The sand flowed endlessly into the pit, disappearing into its black depths. As Steve stepped closer, the air grew heavier, pressing down on him like an invisible force. He peered over the edge, but the bottom was nowhere to be seen. Then, he heard it. A low, guttural hiss. He turned quickly, sword in hand, but the chamber was empty. The hiss came again, louder this time, and the runes around the pit began to glow brighter. The sand at his feet started to shift, pulling toward the pit with increasing force. Steve struggled to move, his boots sinking into the soft ground. Out of the darkness, a figure began to rise. At first, it looked like a simple pile of sand, but it grew taller, taking shape. The figure was humanoid but massive, with glowing eyes and jagged arms that ended in claw-like appendages. It let out a deafening roar, the sound vibrating through the chamber. Steve swung his sword, the blade glowing with enchantments, but it passed harmlessly through the creature. The sand reformed instantly, and the figure swiped at him with its claws. The force knocked him backward, and he slid toward the pit. He scrambled to his feet, drinking a potion of swiftness and running for the nearest exit. The corridors twisted and turned, each passage looking the same as the last. Steve's torches flickered and died, leaving him in near total darkness. The hissing followed him, growing louder, and the walls seemed to close in around him. Finally, he stumbled into another chamber. This one was smaller, with a pedestal in the center. On the pedestal rested a glowing orb, pulsing faintly with light. Steve hesitated, but he could feel the presence of the creature closing in. He reached for the orb, and the moment his hand touched it, the ground trembled violently. The hissing stopped. The chamber was silent. Steve looked around, but the creature was gone. The orb in his hand felt warm, and its light grew brighter, illuminating the room. But the peace didn't last. The walls began to crumble, and the sand poured in from every direction. Steve sprinted for the exit, clutching the orb tightly. The corridors were collapsing behind him, the roar of shifting sand drowning out all other sounds. He ran blindly, following the faint glow of the orb, until he finally emerged into the open desert. The temple behind him sank into the sand, disappearing as if it had never been there. Steve looked down at the orb in his hand. Its light had dimmed, but it still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. He knew this wasn't the end. The desert had let him go, for now, but whatever he had taken from that place wasn't just a treasure. It was a warning.